Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Diversity in Customer Success series and to this webinar, Driving Inclusivity in Customer Success, a Focus in Neurodiversity. I am Gwendolyn Janssen, founder of the END Institute and author of ADHD, How to Go from Powerless Professional to Powerhouse Leader, and I am going to be your host and moderator today. As we begin, please put where you're logging in from in the chat so that we can get an idea as to where all of our participants are from today. First, I want to take a second to really thank Success Coaching and Success in Black for working together to host this webinar. For those of you that aren't familiar with Success Coaching, they are a world leader in customer success training. Their mission is to reinvent the customer success training experience for both leaders and customer success managers, making it accessible, effective, and actionable. They offer a variety of training options from self-paced online courses, live instructor-led boot camps, 12-week coaching programs, as well as live events such as CSM Mastermind and CS Leadership Roundtable. To find out more about what Success Coaching can offer, please visit successcoaching.co. Link will also be dropped in the chat for convenience. And I am proud today to also be representing Success in Black, a new organization that is creating a platform for Black professionals in customer success. We aim to elevate Black professionals in customer success by providing powerful resources to help them advance their careers. We want to stay connected with us through LinkedIn. We'll drop that link in the chat as well, and signing up on our website. That's going to be successinblack, all one word, .co. Before we get started today, we just have a few housekeeping things that we want to go over first.
Okay, just so everyone knows, this call will be recorded. We would ask that you use the Q&A box for any questions that you might wish to ask our panelists, and then use the chat box for other conversations. A recording of this webinar will be available next week. Please visit successcoaching.co to view the recording.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. As Ashley just mentioned, we are offering a replay, so please definitely check out the Success Coaching site in case you miss any of our live event today. So if some of you are only able to stay for a part of it, don't worry, you won't miss out on any of this amazing content that we're going to cover today. You will have access to this event in a recorded manner afterwards. So what I want to start off with is I want to throw it over to our panelists and let them tell you a little bit about themselves, introduce themselves before we dive into some of the content today. So let's start with Molly Hancock. Molly, say hi to everybody and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, so I'm Molly. I'm a customer success manager at Real VNC in Cambridge, and I'm a late diagnosed autistic with ADHD. Alongside my main role, I also volunteer as an inclusion advisor for a charity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Christina, you're up next.
Thanks, Gwen. So my name is Christina Adderley. I've been in customer success in a number of different capacities since about 2015. I currently serve as the manager of the commercial onboarding team at Ting Internet. And that is currently a home-based role. So I've also been working from home since 2015. Like Molly, I'm also a late diagnosed ADHD individual. I wasn't diagnosed until I was about 19 years old. And as we get going in the conversation, I think we'll find that also with women, it's actually not that uncommon to hear that we've been diagnosed late. And so I'm assuming there may be a few of you in the audience that can identify with that as well. And so other than my day job, I also spend a lot of time with Success in Black as a founding member, where I'm currently developing a podcast. So we'll have more about that later.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Christina. And rounding out our powerhouse panel today, Antoinette, tell us a little bit about you.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Antoinette Banks. I am CEO and founder of Expert IEP, where we support the optimization of children's IEP plans, which are educational plans in schools. I also am a mom to an awesome neurodivergent teenager that has autism and ADHD. and I'm an author of a book called Better Than a Diagnosis, A Single Parent's Guide to Autism. I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining us. Ladies, we are ready to have this incredible conversation, so desperately needed, with a huge focus and application in the customer success space. So we wanted to kick off today talking a little bit about how we define neurodiversity and what type of impact does it have on individuals and their workplace dynamics, right? So neurodiversity almost seems to be a little bit of a buzzword these days, at least if you're in the space like the ladies and I are. I'm also a late diagnosed ADHDer and, autistic as well. So all of us, share a lot of the same stories, but what does neurodiversity actually mean, right? There are a lot of different ways that people define it. However, neurodiversity simply refers to a variance in the way that brain chemicals and brain function allow you to show up in the world. So it's really important that we focus on the fact that neurodiversity does not mean a lack of ability or a lack of intelligence, right? So let's get that out of the way right off the bat. Neurodiversity, or sometimes you'll hear people use the term neurodivergent, just because we're talking about some condition that is diverse, or we use the term divergent as if it's off the path of what is quote unquote normal, doesn't mean that people in the neurodiverse population have any less capabilities or strengths than those in the non-neurodiverse population. So here we're just talking about a difference in brain chemical and brain wiring that makes your communication potentially different than people that don't have the same type of neurodiversity, and your brain functioning a little bit different as well. So the impact that it can have on individuals and workplace dynamics is going to be really unique. And that's another takeaway that we want you guys to bring from this session today, is that while we will talk about a lot of umbrella topics and there will be a lot of actionable items that you can take away from today, we don't want you to, leave this session feeling like, one size fits all, right? We want you to remember that neurodiversity truly speaks to the diversity of the human brain, right? So every individual has their own impacts, their own needs, their own accommodations within the workplace. So what we're asking of you is to come into this session with an open mind, and remember there is so much that we have to learn still about neurodiversity, about the impact that it has on individuals and how it shows up in the workplace. So I really want to kick it off first to Christina. So Christina, with that in mind, as we define neurodiversity, how, the impact on individuals and dynamics within the workplace, how would you say that neurodiverse individuals can contribute unique perspectives and talents in a work setting?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the first thing to remember, obviously, is that neurodiversity is as diverse as many people have a diagnosis. And there's also so many people that are still undiagnosed, right? But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that we bring to the table would be our ability to hyper focus on things that we're very interested in or passionate about. And so if we're given a project that we're excited about, we're going to give it our 110%. And linked with that as well is our creative thinking. A lot of us tend to just see things from different angles, think outside of the box. And so, if somebody gives me, a project at work, you might give me, instruction 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to probably ask some questions about the end goal or the end state that we're looking for. And then my brain's going to work backwards and go down a bunch of different rabbit holes that maybe somebody who's not neurodiverse would have thought about. And so with that, we can often bring just unique solutions that hadn't been previously thought about. Obviously, sometimes it can get in our way, and we do have to learn how to kind of rein it in. And there's, a time to kind of let that creativity flourish. And there's also a time to kind of, keep things on track and stay focused on your deadlines. And we'll need some extra tools to help us stay organized. But we also have a lot of us not necessarily like to take risks, but we do so on a whim. And so because we're not necessarily as risk averse, again, we're willing to try new things and just see how they work. We might have had a certain process that we followed for years and years. And then all of a sudden I get this new idea. Because I'm so excited about it in the moment, I'll be willing to try it without really worrying about, oh, what if it doesn't work? Or how does that make me look? And so it just helps us bring like new things to the table. Other, things that might be helpful or characteristics would be like, we can have a lot of energy. We can be optimistic. We can work well under pressure and with short deadlines. In fact, for a lot of us, that's actually when we get the most of our work done. Most of us work to try and, not have that always be the case. But I think if you interview most of us, we're going to tell you that some of our best work was done under pressure. And that's just the truth.
No, you're absolutely right. And I love just how much you covered in that response, Christina, because I think it really speaks to just how many different areas neurodiversity can be a positive for people in the workplace. So I want to circle back to when you talk about creativity and that, that drive to kind of get things done, right? So the fact that, some people would describe it as an impulsivity, but I don't know that that's always the best way to describe it as far as our desire to take risks, right? There's a whole neuroscience behind why we do that. And that's not, this call is not the platform for that. But I want to dive a little deeper into those two concepts. So, can you give me a specific example of, an instance where for you personally, or maybe another neurodiverse professional, or work with, use that creativity or used that, that go-getter attitude where they're like, I'm just going to pull the trigger. We're just going to get this done and see how it goes, right? Without having all the answers laid out, in front of me. Can you give us like a specific example that, the team that's on the call today might be able to garner from and to, might be able to connect with a little bit?
Yeah, let me think. So, I'll go back to a previous role that I was in. I was building out a customer success team in a SaaS company. And, there were definitely some pre-existing kind of like ideas of what they wanted this to look like and how does it go. And for example, in customer success, like we all know about the QBR or the EBR, like that's kind of like our bread and butter. And so the thing that I had kind of realized in a certain project that I was working on and getting everything stood up, our processes, our strategies in place, was I don't think these customers particularly care for a QBR, at least not in the traditional format that we're used to. And so what I did instead was I just had this idea and then I was like, okay, well, let's try something new. Rather than a QBR, let's really put focus on value driving and feature adoption. And so I kind of like wrote out a process for the team, talking points, all kinds of things and resources that they could use. And rather than just get a QBR on the books and kind of move on to the next customer, what they would do is kind of try to follow up with these customers bi-weekly to go through these like value adoption things. So I know that's not like, the most creative example. It's the first one I could think of where I just had this idea. I ran with it. We tried it. We saw how it went. There were some things like we needed to adjust along the way, but the key here is that we tried it and we got started. I think in business in general, a lot of us are self-conscious. We want to succeed. We want to do our job well. That's pretty common across the board. People who are neurodiverse can be a bit more self-critical at times. There's something called rejection sensitive dysphoria that a lot of us suffer from. And that's, a whole other conversation, but needless to say, we can be hard on ourselves. And so in that moment, when we get those ideas that we're passionate about, like we can just go for it and just try it. Whereas other people might spend so much time thinking about why it won't work that they don't even start. And then you'll just be that much further behind. I hope that's helpful.
No, it was. Thank you so much for sharing. So Antoinette, I'd like to pass it over to you at this point because, we talked a little bit about how we define neurodiversity. We talked about some of the contributions that team members that are neurodiverse can bring to the table. So now I want to dive into a little bit about discussing some misconceptions or maybe challenges surrounding neurodiversity in the workplace. What experience do you have with that, with the work that you're doing now, with your personal experience? What are your thoughts on that? And what are some, highlights that you can share with our team today?
Yeah, that's a loaded question because I think that as Christina was saying, being neurodiverse is not a monolith. So it's not a monolithic experience. And oftentimes I have come into contact with other founders or CEOs that are in the hiring process. And the conversation is, I don't understand neurodiversity. I don't understand neurodivergent. And I don't know if I'm even capable of attracting the type of people. Do I support in what type of way? And so I think there's just this interesting idea that people who are neurodivergent are so extraordinarily different that compassion cannot be the foundation for the entire process. And the thing about that is most people who identify with being a neurodivergent are not comfortable with different types of social interactions. It's a thing. And there is evidence to suggest that there are reward centers are different in the minds of a person that is neurodiverse. And so in other words, to make that concrete, if you compliment me, I'm going to think, oh, I got it going on. But if you give so much attention to a person that is neurodivergent, that may make them feel like, am I doing something wrong? And so I think it's really important just to kind of understand in the hiring process, if a person does not give you the direct eye contact or is not doing what you all are doing, you're nodding along, but for a person, they may just look straight at you and give you exactly what you asked for. No. And people are comfortable with being very directly spoken to at times. But I think that that goes to your company culture. Do you want individuals that are going to ask the right questions, that are going to test products out, that are going to be innately curious, that may not communicate in the best way that you want? What is a pro and what is a con here? And I think in general, if hiring individuals and people who have the responsibility to have companies are innately building that into their culture and their expectations, then it sort of disperses this myth of I'm not prepared to hire a neurodivergent individual. And so it just goes back to what's a company's mission and where do they want to reach and how fast do they want to go? Because if you want to go fast, then you want to attract as many neurodiverse and divergent and diverse people in general, because usually DEI does not extend to people that have who are neurodivergent or have disclosed disabilities or exceptionalities. And so that belongs into the mix as well. So that was a little, I could go on talking about that as someone that hires neurodivergent people and as a mama bear that has a neurodivergent kid. It's really not that deep.
No, you're absolutely right, Antoinette. And I really love that you talk about, when we're talking about misconceptions and challenges, right? There's so many aspects of neurodiversity that can come across as rude or brash or ineffective or poor communicators, right? When realistically, that's not the case. When you have team members that might just communicate differently, it is important that we strip away our bias, that we take a step back and understand how much of this is truly critical in the role that I'm trying to hire this person into, and how much of it is built into me from societal expectations or societal norms that, you expect someone to shake your hand really hard and look you directly in the eye and, and not be so blunt in their communication, right? When realistically, a lot of these things can be strengths. They're not weaknesses or areas for opportunity per se. So I love that you talk about that. And hiring is definitely a huge element to this. So if we have time, we'll circle back to that in a little bit. So Molly, I want to spend a little bit of time with you talking about, now that we've gone through definition, positive attributes, challenges surrounding neurodiversity in general, let's dig into the meat of the topic of this conversation and this webinar today when we talk about customer success, right? So what would you say are some common obstacles that neurodiverse employees are going to encounter in customer-facing roles specifically?
Oh, that's a good question. I think starting like everyone else has, pointing out that those hurdles and obstacles are so individual per person, but ones that I've come across myself and I've known other to come across, and these are going to be very specific examples. One would be the onboarding into a company. I think it's that crucial first introduction to your role and the company, and a good onboarding and enablement strategy for a new employee is helping them understand what it is that you do. I've been in positions where the onboarding has been amazing, and I've been in positions where it's a bit of a work it out situation. And I think as an autistic person, I love context. And without that starting context, we sort of struggle. And I think onboarding and enablement is often seen as something that's everyone says, oh, we need to get there, we need to do it, we need to have it. But they don't realize that people are being quite heavily impacted while you don't have it. And I think it's important to consider different ways to do onboarding as well, not just an enablement, not just sales role plays, but like interactive sessions, readings, videos, different things like this. Another one would be, I think we've touched on it, but needing to know why. There's always going to be lots of changes in customer facing roles, whether it's priorities, CRM, structure, but it's the way that those are communicated that is critical to us neurodivergent employees. I've worked places where I've been told I asked too many questions, and then it's been written down that I am reluctant to change. And I know that being reluctant to change is a trait of being autistic, but I will change. I just need to know a little bit more about why. But that seems to be a massive obstacle. It's perceived as like challenging, and I'm not. I just really want to know why, and I would hope they know why too. So I'm always happy to hear it. A final one that I think is quite one I'm reluctant to admit often because it's not ideal for an employee is task management. If I have lots of things to do and I have too many and there's no clear process or structure, I can't do any of them. I just sit there in complete waiting state almost. And I think it's so easily managed with good leadership who can help you come up with a schedule or accountability deadlines, as I like to call them, where maybe I'm going to take longer to do this thing, but we'll make sure it gets done by this date. So business isn't impacted, but there's a little bit more awareness that us ND folk might just need a bit more of a process there.
No, absolutely. And, that kind of digs into, our next question about how are companies going to foster a more inclusive culture for neurodiverse individuals, right? And, when you talk about flexibility in the role to meet the needs of the neurodiverse professional while leaning into their strengths, I think that's a big key piece there, right? At least what I found is that, one of the major drawbacks of, modern society and the working world as a whole is that we really try to fit everyone into a box, right? Think about the common JD, right? When you have a job description, we're trying to fit a plethora of different types of people into this tiny little description on the type of ideal employee that we want to have, right? When realistically, how much of that is just fluff and nonsense, and how much of it is truly important and critical to the role, and how can we then tailor that to meet the strengths of the person that we're placing into that role and build support systems around them to allow them to succeed, even if they don't work in a linear fashion, even if they're not able to kind of keep that consistent productivity over an 8-hour period, and might, like we all know, right? Like Christina was talking about hyper focus before, right? We might struggle to get things done all day, and then all of a sudden in the last 30 minutes of the day we get 8 hours of work done, right? So this I would throw out, really, Molly, I'll start with you, and then I would love to hear Christina and Antoinette's thoughts on this. What are some ways that companies can foster an inclusive culture for neurodiverse individuals?
I was very lucky to attend a Neurodiversity in Business conference earlier this year by Dan Harris. And it was an amazing conference with lots of like-minded folk. And there was this lovely little ideology that was bumping around that was, in order to create an inclusive environment for neurodivergent folk at work, you just need to create an inclusive environment for everybody. I think we forget that there is so much that goes into neurodivergent folk having adjustments and being in an inclusive environment and being set up to succeed. And there's so much privilege and sheer luck to get to the point of diagnosis, or to feel safe enough to disclose, or to realize it within yourself. And a lot of the points made there were brilliant around, actually, if you can make the adjustment for one, make it for everyone, and you'll catch everybody in that, whether it's someone who doesn't realize themselves they're neurodivergent, or it's a working mum or a working parent. Someone will always need to catch a little bit of a break or do a task a different way. So I think it's around like just being aware that, just preempt it, just make sure that everything's inclusive. And I think there's a real hesitancy from businesses, from what I can understand, thinking that, oh, well, if I tell one person they can do this, everyone's going to do it, and then we're never going to get anything done. But I think was tale as old a time, happy staff, happy business. So
no, absolutely. Right. If we allow everyone to work the way that they want to work, our productivity will most likely skyrocket, not the opposite. Right. Christina, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have any specific insight as to, how you think we can build a more inclusive culture for neurodiverse individuals as companies?
Yeah, I think building on what Molly was saying, to take a step back for a second, we have to remember that there's kind of like a difference between managers and leaders. Some managers are also leaders, but not all managers are leaders. And I think this is one of the areas if you pay attention, you're really going to kind of like suss that out. And so I think a lot of managers, and I remember even like very early in my career, the way that I was coached or things that I was taught, just this initial perception of like professionalism that I had, kind of revolved around these kind of, going back to what you said earlier, going around like putting people in a box. Like these are just very, basic rules of engagement essentially in business. And so I think sometimes managers tend to think if we don't like put very strict rules on our employees, like they're not going to do the right thing. But with neurodiverse individuals, when we have like too many constraints like that, it often can feel like very overwhelming. And remember, one of the biggest symptoms of any issue that leads to neurodiversity is just issues with executive function, right? And so like the more pressure that we feel to kind of like perform or just like behave in a certain way, the more that it's going to kind of catch up with us and impact our work, because we're so anxious now. Now our ADHD is out of control. We're ruminating. We have rejection sensitive dysphoria. So I think as a manager, you need to kind of remember, like Molly said, make the accommodations across the board for everyone. Stop worrying. Like if you're hiring good people, stop worrying that they're not going to do the right thing and realize that there are different types of people. People learn and work in different types of ways. So if we adjust our expectations around things like behavior, I think we're going to get much more positive results from our team and our workforce. And just as an example, I mean, I've seen some different things at play here, but I think, certain companies, they might want to put in like their values, be your authentic self or things like that. Well, for people who are neurodiverse, that is like very impactful, because I'll tell you, when that was a company value somewhere that I worked, and it was actually something that showed up in our annual kind of like performance assessments. It was kind of go through all of the values and how do you rate yourself on each of the values, and how does your manager rate you? I was so nervous for that, because it's like, can I really be my authentic self if I'm being judged on it? Right. And so sometimes people who are not neurodiverse, they don't consider the full angle of how that affects other people on the team. And sometimes if you're the person that kind of flags that as, hey, is this really the best, option? Is this really right? Then, like Molly, you might get labeled as reluctant to change, or like doesn't want to follow their rules, is making excuses for their behavior. But it's like, that is separate from my work. Like I show up to work as myself. I do my job. I ask too many questions. Some people get annoyed, but other people appreciate, the questions that I'm asking, because it's helping me dig deeper and like do my work better. So I think at the core, it's flexibility and adjusting our expectations to understand that my employees are not all cookie cutter. We're not like in a military here. We're all different, and that's totally fine. So if we make work accommodations flexible, meaning, in some places I've actually seen you've got a 15 or 30 minute window start time. And some days I show up at 9 and some days I show up at 9:15, but the impact on my work and my mental health of like not having to be considered late and like be brought in for a meeting because I was here at 9:01 today. That's just huge. So flexibility, I think, is something we really need to consider.
No, I love all of your points there, especially because it did, touch on another question that we were going to talk about regarding the role that leaders and managers can play, right? And I think it's so funny because I agree with you. I've been in healthcare my entire career, right? And authenticity has always been something that has been touted at all of the organizations that I've worked for. Is like, yeah, like bring your authentic self to work. And as I've moved up in leadership, same thing. It's always like, be your authentic self. And then all of a sudden, when I start to do that, it's like, oh no, not like that. Right. And so, it's so important that we as leaders, do recognize and lean into the fact that we don't want a team of people that have all identical strengths. Right. And how can we help to ensure that each person's strength is able to be showcased and we give them the work that aligns best with their strengths and maybe like reassign some of the work that doesn't really work well for them, right? So no, I think you make really excellent points. And I did just want to touch on a piece where you talk about like the delayed start time as a potential accommodation. Within the neurodiverse community, delayed circadian rhythm syndrome is something that so many of us suffer from. Up to 75% of neurodiverse people actually have delayed circadian rhythm, right? That can be 2+ hours later than not people that are not neurodivergent. And, so again, it's that flexibility of like, to be honest, we think that like a workday is 7 to 3, 9 to 5, et cetera. But realistically, what difference does it make if this person instead works 11 in the morning to 7 at night? Things like that, right? It's little things that we need the ability to question ourselves and remove our ego, remove our bias from it to know what we really need out of our team members, right? And to your earlier point, I think it might have been Steve Jobs that said it, but don't quote me on that, where he was like, we don't hire smart people and tell them what to do, right? We hire smart people and let them tell us what to do. And I think that that's such a critical element in neurodiversity, is that we don't hire these people with all of their potential and then try and force them to be things that they're not, right? We need to allow that potential to flourish in the way that's most natural to neurodiverse people. So Antoinette, I don't know if you're still on with us. So I'm going to just real quick, Molly, I'll probably throw you, one more quick question before we dive into our Q&A from our participants today, because it looks like we have some really great questions there. So what are your thoughts on, as we're wrapping up the panelist part of this before we go into the questions, training and education, right? How do these two things play a role in reducing some of these misconceptions and challenges that we've talked about and improve and foster understanding about neurodiversity as a whole and in customer success?
Oh, another great question. I think, it might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but as an autistic person, I'm a little bit done with like autism awareness trainings and things like this. I think there is plenty out there to sort of self-start your own personal journey into understanding neurodivergency, attend a webinar, attend a talk, listen to a podcast, read a book. But in workplaces, the training is so crucial to being that first step to affirming your neurodivergent staff. I think look to hire someone with lived experience and qualifications who can speak from personal experience and train your staff, and maybe even hire them to consult on what are you doing for DE&I? Do you have any employee resource groups? Get them to feel out, what are you doing? Is it neurodiversity affirming? I would also encourage your HR to be a safe space for people to ask questions and get things wrong. The biggest thing I've found in my inclusion role at the charity is people are really scared to say the wrong thing and get something wrong. And I have always found someone in a workplace who will say, you don't look autistic, or everyone's a little bit autistic, so often. But it's about making sure they don't feel shut down and like morally attacked. So they go on the defense, but ensuring the company has like an educational piece, either in your values or in your standard understanding, that you can redirect them towards so that they learn a bit of better understanding. And that fostering of that understanding has to come from above. Without understanding your neurodivergent employees, as we've spoken on, so many misconceptions happen, and it can really start to harm a neurodivergent person's career if everyone perceives them as difficult or rude or unwelcoming because they've got in this spiral of miscommunication after miscommunication. So it's better to just get that training done up front, do it now, avoid any sort of future issues and misconceptions. And I would actually say, I've spoken twice about the Neurodiversity in Business Conference now. I'm not being paid to, I promise. But they did a report earlier this year called the Neurodiversity in Work Report, which was by neurodivergent folk for neurodivergent folk in workplaces. And I would really recommend giving it a read because it's got some great statistics in there. And a statistic to leave you with is that only 21.7% of UK autistic adults are employed. So we do need to do something to bring more people into employment. And I think it's on all of us, unfortunately.
No, thank you for sharing that statistic. And I just want to re-highlight that for a second in case it didn't sink in yet. Just over 20% of autistic adults are employed, right? Like, imagine that if that were the greater population. Can you imagine if we had an almost 80% unemployment rate among people that were not neurodiverse? Like, that would be catastrophic, right? And so why are we not spending more time thinking about it and doing something about it for the neurodiverse population, for our team members that are autistic, our team members that have ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, et cetera, right? Neurodiversity is a very broad term. I really love that you bring that up, Molly, because it is so impactful, right? And I don't think that people notice those things, and I don't think we pay enough attention to them. And at the beginning, when you talked about, people telling you that you don't look autistic, I can relate to that because I get that all the time. And second of all, what does that say about our understanding of autistic presentations, right? Like, it's very clear that we have so much work to do in education and training, so we want to challenge all of you on the call today, to take this stuff back to your companies and really help be the voice of movement for your neurodiverse peers, colleagues, family, friends, yourselves, et cetera. So really quick, I see that Antoinette joined us again. So I just want to allow her to speak on something really quick before we move to our Q&A here, because I think this is important and might answer some of our questions. So when we talk about how we can support our neurodiverse, selves and friends and peers and colleagues, in your opinion and your experience, what are some effective strategies or accommodations that can easily be implemented, right, to support neurodiverse employees? Many people get the misconception that they have to be big or they have to be expensive or it needs to be this big, giant overhaul. But share with us, what are some things that can be implemented easily, quickly, that really can be game changers for our neurodiverse team members?
So, first, can you hear me? Because
yes,
the internet is not my friend today. Okay, great. So I like to do things that are welcome kits and in our onboarding strategies. And one thing I like to keep in the back of my mind too, is there are a lot of stigma for individuals and different communities. And so sometimes a person doesn't feel empowered to share that they have anything that they're working with. And so I hope that I've created a community where people could come talk to me and let me know what's going on. But in the event that someone is just not there yet, what I offer is just small things that can really help them. I do a lot of tactical type things. I give them fidgets as a welcome onto the team. And we do this thing that I wish I was in a different location where I could show you now, but we use lights. And so depending on how a person is feeling, if they're feeling overproductive, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they're feeling like they can take on more tasks, depending on what light is showing at the desk or our motion, we have motion activated lights too. That supports a lot of communication. It takes a lot of guessing out of things too, where someone is not, if they don't want to talk with you and, talk shop or whatever, it's because they're really focused and get out of their hyperfixation focused moment, because they are literally about to change the world. Just give them a little bit and let them cook is what I like to say. Let them cook, leave them alone. You see that yellow? Okay, leave them alone. Yeah. So that's what I love to do. And I like to also, at certain points say, how's your computer set up? Do you need anything else? Kind of do like check-ins, small, minor things. And I think the upfront cost is what may shy people away when they want to have different, more comfortable things to support the people who are working with you. But the later gains outweighs that by far. And so those are just some small tips, small strategies. If I notice that we're not on task, I never put it on the person or the individual. It's more or less like, how can I create a process that is much more clear and have redundancies as well to make sure that everybody's on the same page and on track? Because then it rules out all of the feelings and emotions. Now we're just sticking to data. I don't care if you're not going to look at me in my face. I care that you get to our milestones and our deliverables. And if you've handled them well, then, let's go to dinner and celebrate. But in the meantime, in between time, I think it's just respecting where people are in the moments and giving them the tools to operate in the way in which they need to operate. And again, that goes back to company culture, that goes back to budgetary line items and things like that. If you know that you want to be inclusive, then you have to put that into your operational budget to make sure that you can afford to do that, because the company culture will shift and you guys will end up moving and building faster than probably what you had originally projected.
Very, very well said. Thank you, Antoinette. So I'd like to take this time to dive into some questions that have come up during our discussion, right? If we have time, we'll also get to the questions or comments that have come into the chat, but I want to start with the Q&A. So let's dive into this first one. What are the most productive ways that you've shared your neurospicy needs and even potentially your diagnosis with manager and coworkers? So if any of you would like to dive into this one, or if all of you kind of want to chime in with your own thoughts, I think we leave this a little bit more, you guys tell me how you want to respond to these, right? So what are your thoughts on this? What are productive ways that you've talked about your needs, potentially shared your diagnosis, with either your one-up or your peers in the workplace?
I'll go. I think it's quite a tough thing to approach doing because you never know how it's going to be received. When I have done it, I have sniffed out the people around me first. I've spoken about an autistic friend or a friend with ADHD, or I've spoken about the traits that are sometimes most negatively viewed, like, for example, not always being able to do everything done. And maybe in the interview, I'll say, oh, how do you support a member who's struggling with workload? Things like this. The way that I've found the most productive, per se, is to be honest. And I've really had to work it out with myself that I'm okay, whatever the outcome is here from the company, and I'll make my decision on if I need to move on. But just know, if I want to do it, just go and speak to either the manager or the HR and just say, look, I'm autistic, I've got ADHD, I'm neurodivergent, whatever way, and be prepared for them to kind of say in true manager fashion, how can I support you? And just be prepared with some ideas is what I would say.
Yeah, I think I can echo that as well. I mean, in the beginning, because I was only diagnosed when I was 19. So definitely lucky enough, like, I hadn't really started my career yet, but I definitely had jobs before. And just based on those early professionalism biases that I had, I was terrified of telling anyone because I thought all of a sudden it means she's less able to, they're going to look at me like I'm less able to do my job. Should she really be here? And then they're also going to look at everything I do with a microscope, kind of waiting to call me out. And so as I got older, though, and I started to do a lot of work on myself and that type of thing, I realized, like Molly said, at the end of the day, it's going to be what it's going to be. So I need to just be honest about who I am and what I need in order for this to work out. And so now I make it a point, if I'm interviewing to go to a new company, I'm going to be asking questions about diversity and inclusivity. How do they handle that? I'm going to ask questions about company culture. I'm going to ask the manager, questions that will point me towards their management style and their leadership style to try and understand, is this going to be a good fit for me? And then once I'm in the job, every workplace is a little bit different, but as I'm kind of noticing things, if there is a need for an accommodation, I'm going to voice that right away, because if I've learned anything in my career, it's keeping quiet and just struggling along the way does nothing for anyone. and things can often end up a lot worse than had you just kind of voiced it. So it's nothing creative. It's just, hey, like, these are the things I'm struggling with. And like Molly said, waiting for them to say, how can I support you? And if that's not the response, then maybe I need to think about if this is the right place for me. Unfortunately, that's a place that a lot of us find ourselves in. You know, they say that about, I think it's like 15 to 20% of like the entire, I think like North American population is neurodiverse on some level. And so that means pretty much every company has someone at least that's neurodiverse, but not every company is necessarily accustomed to dealing with it. So just go in, be honest, and see what happens.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is this during the interview process?
Not necessarily. So it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think that's, the way that we've framed it so far. But certainly, if you want to talk about it more in the frame of once you're already employed, please feel free to dive into that.
No, I was going to say, in the interview process, it depends on the company that you're working with, but I would recommend just being very concrete. Look at the actual company, see what initiatives that exist and why you might be interested in working with the company, and then give them solutions. So in the interview process, tell them you have X initiative. I can help you get to that point in the next 90 days. And I do that because I'm also neurodivergent. And so if you fold that in your success chart and your success plan, then that takes the framework away from the hiring manager that is working with whoever, they got to get people in too. So help them help you. Be very tactical and unapologetic and unforgiving. Let them know that you can solve their problems and you're uniquely poised to do that because you come with all of this uniqueness about yourself.
Amen to that. There is another simple tool that I learned in one of the leadership workshops that I've been to that isn't specific to neurodiversity, but I think is a really phenomenal stepping stone if you're not super comfortable talking really openly about your diagnosis or you're trying to feel out the waters for how supportive, a new company or your current company is going to be. And it's just like a little, it's 4 boxes, right? And you fill it out and it says, you get my best when you, right? And basically, what do you need from them? You get my worst when you, right? And, hey, what is it that you can do that like would make it really challenging for me? And, I like it best when, et cetera. Like, what are your needs? What are the things that are going to set you up for success versus what are the things that are going to kind of either hinder you, hold you back, et cetera. So just a simple 4-box tool like that can be a really great beginner exercise for you to, again, kind of test it out if you're unsure how your current company or the company you're interviewing for is going to respond. But I do want to take a moment to echo what the ladies have said in the sense of it can be very scary to think about either leaving your current role or not being accepted into a position that you're really, wanting to, to move into. However, I think that each and every one of you owes yourself the ability to be wholly yourself at work, right? And so, how much, you want this role, it's important that you take a step back and recognize, like, yes, it might seem like the dream job, but is it truly the dream job, dream company, dream team? If I'm being hindered in ways X, Y, and Z, or if I'm not being supported in ways X, Y, and Z, right? So just a little food for thought to take away for our neurospicy friends on the phone. Thank you, ladies, for that. So next question we have from our team here today. And we've covered this a little bit. So if you guys, want to just either rehash the highlights or if you want to add some additional color to it, what are some of the tips you have for neurodiverse people to thrive in customer success roles specifically?
I could take it. I think I just want to add as a follow-on from what we've been speaking about. We've spoken a lot about how we have unique talents and we have this ability to do exceptional things. I think it's okay also if you just want to do the job. I think it's really important to remind you that you can be neurodivergent and not go above and beyond and not need to outperform your fellow employees and not head on the road to burnout. You can just do the job the way everyone else does. You don't have to bring like a superpower per se. But in terms of tips to help neurodiverse people thrive in customer success, I wish I had a perfect answer, but I still struggle myself. I think for me, I've found this career the most helpful for being neurodivergent. Working with all these different companies, I'm constantly reigniting the kind of passion. I'm seeing lots of different things all the time. But I think the biggest tip to thrive is finding a company that works with you. Their day-to-day strategies work with how you want to work. And if they don't, you're allowed to work how you want to work. Kind of how we've spoken, you need to find, how do I work best and does it fit here? Because if you try to put yourself in a position where you're trying to work how you don't work best for them, you can only sustain it for so long. So again, unfortunately, it's more self-work, working out how you work best, which takes years and is no easy feat.
Amen. Christina or Antoinette, do you guys have anything specific to add for customer success roles and neurodivergent employees?
Honestly, I think Molly gave like a very great answer to that. I think the only thing I would add is just take the time to learn what works for you. Customer success itself is so diverse. I mean, it's going to look different at pretty much every company. Obviously, there are a few things that are going to be the same. Your skills are going to transfer, but take the time, whether you're starting a new role or you've been in it for a while, to like assess what's going well for you, what isn't, what are those issues. Do you need to have a conversation with your manager? Do you need to maybe look at adjusting the way that you do certain things or how you show up to certain things? If so, then do that. But at the end of the day, when, like you said, like you have the right to be able to be your authentic self at work, and just don't forget that. So if you keep that at the core as you're navigating things, I think you'll be able to be successful.
Love that. Thank you, Christina. Antoinette, looks like you're echoing everyone's thoughts. So I will move on to the next question, because I really, really love this one. And I think, all of you ladies will be able to speak very eloquently to this. So what are some resources that managers and leaders can use to get more educated on supporting neurodiverse employees?
Well, this one's going to be super basic, but it's something that's often overlooked, is ask your employees. So you can do, anonymous feedback surveys and things like that, but we need to create, that psychological safety and that safe environment for this type of discussion. You can go out into the world and do all of the research that you want on neurodiversity, but if you haven't heard from the employees that actually work in your company and you don't know their specific feelings, the things that they struggle with specifically, the things they excel at specifically, then you're missing a complete opportunity to tailor things for your own company. So definitely don't forget that. I think is number one. Then I'll save some room for the others.
Yeah. Antoinette or Molly, do you have any specific resources that you guys really feel like are reputable? You feel like are actually good starting points for managers and leaders of teams with neurodiverse people?
I really do think LinkedIn is great. I think it's been a great place for people to speak about their experiences at work and lean on each other. And I do think there are several neurodiversity collectives, as well as like top voices who are neurodiverse and open about it, that I think it's worth going and having a look through. And I'm going to mention them again, but the Neurodiversity in Business charity has been brilliant in finding people and realizing that you're not alone in trying to work it all out. And I think that place, it might be labeled Neurodiversity in Business, but it's for everybody to go and work out how we can help. And it's a great starting point for what do we do and where do we go next?
Yeah, so my own resources are fabulous. But additionally, I really do a lot of work with neurodivergent movements on college campuses. And I think getting in and understanding from a different lens, especially from young people who are really fired up, it helps to understand how to build better culture. And I keep coming back to culture because that's what it is at the end of the day. I also think that Salesforce does really good trainings on this at times. They fold in different companies that really speak clearly about the resource guides to support people, different type of all human variants working in the organizations. And I think they do a really great job with it.
Wonderful. Thank you, ladies. And, we've kind of, through answering this question, answered another one, that I love, that talks about what are the traits that we see in managers who we feel like have supported us the most, right? And I think the common thread here that I keep hearing you guys talk about, and I keep seeing in our chat as well from our participants on the call, is really just to listen, right? Is to be open to feedback, to be willing to sit down, to take the time to ask the right questions, and to then acknowledge that what the person is telling you is what their need is. And, regardless of what your bias might be when you're looking at them, like Molly talked about, like, oh, you don't look autistic, or, like, oh, do you really need that? Or, or whatever, is just believing each individual, but first and foremost, taking the time to ask and to hear them, right? Is there anything else that you ladies feel like you would like to add to that piece as far as specific experiences that you've had with leaders that have been very supportive of you?
Yeah, I'm thinking of one leader in particular, and kind of all of the things that he brought to the table that made it such a good experience. But I would say empathy, number one, like we just kind of talked about. And also, if we're talking about like personality traits or characteristics, it would be someone who's like a natural relator, someone who can take the time to actually like get to know you as a person, like not just the condition or whatever it is you're talking about, but someone who can take the time to get to know you on a deeper level. Our employees have so much depth to them, whether they're neurodiverse or not. And I think like not necessarily going there with them and understanding kind of what makes them tick. I saw someone in the chat mention like the Clifton Strengths Finder earlier, and I think that's a fantastic tool to use with your teams to get to know each other. So like that's one way you can do that if you're not kind of like a natural relator. But I think empathy, relationship building, and then also just like open-mindedness, again, to like be able to put their bias or like previous, assumptions aside, to understand that like, oh, Christina is like just another person. She's great at her job. She just, her brain just happens to work in a different way. Like, that's literally it. I'm just like, we're all different, whether you're neurodiverse or not. So having that open-mindedness, I think, really played a part in that.
So, ladies, we are down to the last 2 minutes. So I think, just to be respectful of everyone's time, there are a ton of really wonderful questions from our participants today in the Q&A. And, as Christina mentioned, people have been putting really wonderful things in the chat. So maybe this is a signal that we need to do a part 2 on this session, right? So that we can come back and answer some of these. But for today, first and foremost, we want to thank all of our guests, as well as our incredible panelists, for making this a really wonderful discussion. We hope that you got something out of it, that it was a value add for your time. And we do want to end this discussion by urging all of you today to continue to invest in yourselves. Please follow Success in Black on LinkedIn. Link is going to be in the chat to stay connected on programs and events. And also make sure that you check out Success Coaching's website. So that link is going to be in the chat as well for more detailed information on what they can offer you, and also to make sure you keep an eye out for the link to the recording for this session, for anyone that wants to share it, that, with people that you think could benefit that weren't able to attend today, or for anyone that had to drop off the call, this will be available. So we want to thank you guys so much for your time today. And we look forward to seeing you all at a future time. Please connect with all of us on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to continue these conversations. And we will see you next time.